Here's an interesting number to point out. $240 billion wiped out from the global chips sector, global market value, we should say, since the close on Thursday. And we're talking about it, of course, because of those export controls the U.S. has now put in. And that really has had global implications. We are continuing to see a sell-off in U.S. chip stocks. You see NVIDIA down 2.5%. Qualcomm seeing the biggest losses there, down about 4.7%. All this, of course, as investors try to calculate their exposure to the Chinese market. A lot of this spilling over from what we saw over in the Asia session, particularly over in South Korea and Japan. A bit of a catch-up session there because they did have the Monday holiday off. But take a look at where those stocks, chip makers, ended up. We're talking about Renesas, which is a chip maker, semiconductor equipment maker. Tokyo Electron also down significantly. Over in South Korea, we did see Samsung and SK Hynix, the biggest chip makers out there, also down significantly. And then worth noting what we saw over with TSMC, of course, the largest chip maker globally, down significantly. We're talking about 7% right now. By the way, the sell-off was so significant, what we saw there. And also, as so many of these countries and companies try to figure out the global implications, we have seen a move in currencies as well. The Korean won down there about 0.4%. So we're here to break it all down for you this morning with Dan Howley, our very own chip expert here at Yahoo Finance. And Dan, I just ran through so many different stocks we've been tracking over in Asia, here in the U.S. By the way, we also didn't talk about ASML over in Europe, but how are you making sense of these latest export controls that have been put in place? That ruling came down on Friday, but there's still a lot the market is still processing right now. Yeah,
you talk about those the companies that are overseas that had the holiday, SK Hynix, Samsung, TSMC. You can see them kind of just dropping off as they kind of get back into things. But then you look at the likes of, let's say NVIDIA or Intel, Qualcomm. They're all still being hit. You could see that came in on Monday. And, you can look at stuff like Applied Materials, Lam Research, KLA Corp. These are all companies that also took a hit. Those companies are about the manufacturing side of things. So I think that's something that's important to look at. It's the manufacturing aspect as well as the overall technology. So Applied Materials, Lam Research, KLA, they're talking about wafer manufacturing. Those are a problem there. And it'll continue to be a problem because those companies are providing the capabilities to companies in China to actually build the chips that they need. Then you look at the chip companies like SK Hynix, like Samsung, like TSMC, that have actual factories out there in China. So they're all getting hit. And I think that, you're going to continue to see this. Then obviously some American companies as well when it comes to the AI side of things. NVIDIA had taken a hit a while back when there was discussion of more export controls going into effect. And they said that they were working with the Biden administration to try to figure out what they can do there. But obviously we're seeing them taking some damage now as well.
Yeah, and we're sort of backing up to say, well, what exactly the ruling was in case people are just sort of catching up right now. Number one, this new ruling means it would limit chip makers from semiconductors made with U.S. technology. We're talking about the most advanced AI supercomputers. Also, those U.S. citizens would not be allowed to be a part about that.
Which is wild, yeah.
Which is certainly key. And then, of course, you wouldn't be able to use U.S. equipment to manufacture these chips. And that's the thing that we often forget, right? So many of these companies, you've got global names out there, but many of them still use U.S. equipment. If you are one of those, you would not be able to export to China.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing that kind of gets lost is that the U.S. is still the leader, dominates the space when it comes to building actual chips. The companies that build chips or provide the materials to build chips, those are largely U.S. companies. So if you take that out of the equation, it's a huge blow to China. It's a huge blow to these companies. And, obviously the discussion here is about whether or not the technologies will be fed into the Chinese military. And that's the big kind of catch there. It's the same thing that we've been talking about for some time when it comes to technology in China. And we saw this during the Trump administration, obviously seeing it during the Biden administration. But, it'll continue to roll out. And we just have to see how the other chip companies start to kind of process this, or, if they can get some exceptions.
And worth noting really quickly that this isn't just about the regulation, because this all comes at a time when we have seen a slowdown, whether it's demand in PCs, demand in other consumer electronics. That's another headwind working against some of these chip makers, which is why we're seeing the pullback.
Yeah, Gartner yesterday released their latest note saying that worldwide PC shipments declined 19.5% in the third quarter. That's the worst decline in 2 decades. Worth pointing out, by the way, that it doesn't mean that the PC market is just, going away. It's that we saw such explosive growth
during the pandemic.
And now it's coming back to, you don't buy a computer every year. That's crazy. I mean, unless, you're like me.
Yeah.
But, this is going to be an issue, I think, for, at least 3 years before we start to see PC sales start to pick up again.
Okay, just another narrative to add to the global tech space there. Thanks so much for that, Dan.